Hello and welcome to The Agenda. I'm Stephen Cole, and this week we're talking to one of the titans of the aviation industry, Willie Walsh. I'll be asking the former CEO of Aer Lingus, British Airways and IAG, now head of the industry body IATA, just what the future holds for flying. That the airline industry has been one of the hardest hit by the pandemic can't be questioned. Airlines are expected to lose around $48 billion this year alone, thanks to COVID, with final estimates only growing. And as soon as anything like normality can resume, the industry has some big questions to answer, not least how polluting planes can continue to operate in a carbon-neutral future. But joining me now to answer those questions and many more is Willie Walsh, one of the most important figures in aviation, a former CEO of Aer Lingus, British Airways and its parent company IAG. Early this year, he became the Director General of the industry's trade body, IATA, and that stands for the International Air Transport Association. Willie Walsh, welcome to The Agenda. And for those who don't know, can you describe how you see IATA's role in the aviation world?
Yes, IATA is a very important body set up to represent, serve, we say lead the industry, but in fact, I think our focus needs to be on representing and serving. So we are the voice of the industry. We try to bring together the wide variety of views covering airlines right across the world and to express those in a clear and coherent way in front of governments, stakeholders right across the world.
And what are the goals, your ambitions that you've set for yourself as leader of IATA?
Well, in the first place, I think we have to focus on the survival of the industry. We are in survival mode. As you've said, this is the deepest crisis the industry has ever faced. And maybe to put it into context, because people often ask me to compare what we're seeing today versus previous crises. If I look back to 2001 and following the tragic events of 9/11, the airline industry's revenues fell by about 6.4%. Very, very significant. We haven't seen anything like that before. Move on then to 2009, the depth of the global financial crisis. Industry revenues fell by 16.5%. So really deep crisis for the industry. Last year, 2020, revenues fell by 56%. So this is on a completely different scale to anything we had seen before. And therefore, you would expect every airline CEO and management team around the world absolutely focused on surviving this deep and quite an extended crisis. Moving out of this, our number one priority will be on the environmental performance and ensuring that we not only have a sustainable business from a financial point of view, but a sustainable business from an environmental point of view. So that will become the key focus of IATA and the industry as we come through this crisis.
And you're very well placed to take that overview and give us a short history of the background, because you've been around planes all your career, going back to the late 1970s as a cadet pilot. That's a long career in the business. It's been a long flight. So when did you think it really started to take off?
Yeah, well, I have to be honest, starting in 1979 as a cadet pilot in Aer Lingus was, for me, a great achievement. 17 years of age, getting the opportunity to train as a pilot. And I enjoyed my career as a pilot. I flew for the first 18 years of my career. But for the second part of that, for about the last 9 years that I was flying, I was also engaged in management activities, principally in the technical and safety side of the airline. But then becoming an airline CEO for a small airline, a subsidiary of Aer Lingus based in Spain. I was 36 years of age when I was appointed CEO. So I think my career, the career that I followed really started back then, 1998, as an airline CEO, and then becoming the CEO for Aer Lingus in 2001 after the tragic events of 9/11. And clearly developed since then, taking over at British Airways, IAG, and now in my role as Director General of IATA. So it's been a long, fascinating, really challenging, but incredibly rewarding career.
And more challenges to come. When you stepped down from the top job at IAG in 2020, I think, there was talk of you retiring. I don't know if you were thinking of retiring, but here we are. What kind of unfinished business did you have?
Yeah, it was my plan. I'd actually made clear for a number of years that my intention was to retire once I stopped at IAG. I announced my retirement in early January of 2020, before all of this pandemic started. And then as it became clear, really going through February, that we were going to face a significant crisis, I extended my term. I was due to finish at the end of March, and I extended that until the end of September, just to steer IAG through the initial phase of the crisis. So when I left in September, my intention was to retire. I have to be honest, I felt bad leaving the industry at that stage, given the state of the industry. And when I was approached about the Director General position of IATA, I felt I still had something to contribute, because I think the industry needs a strong voice. And given the experience I have, I felt that I could do that. So it was unfinished business, principally because of the state of the industry when I finally left IAG.
So let's go with the state of the industry affected and so damaged by COVID, because there are currently a suitcase, literally, of requirements. And that suitcase seems to be getting heavier by the day for people travelling. And also that'll apply to transport of freight too. Questions like, do we have enough masks? Our test results haven't turned up on time. You need to quarantine on your return. This is incredible, the number of tests and the problems you have trying to get a flight, trying to get off a flight, trying to get on into a country. It won't be a surprise to hear many people have been put off flying altogether. When do you think you can make it an enjoyable experience again?
I'm pretty confident things will improve significantly as we go through the rest of this year and into next year. You're quite right. The variation in requirements from country to country is astonishing. You would have thought, particularly if you look at the EU, that this was a perfect opportunity for countries to come together and apply a common set of standards. It's very confusing for airline customers at the moment. We are trying to provide data advice in a clear way through the development of what we call the IATA Travel Pass. But you're right. A lot of people have been put off flying. The good news, however, is in markets where we see these restrictions being relaxed or removed, we see an immediate response in demand. So I'm confident that things will come back and will improve as we go through the remaining months of 2021, and then hopefully get better still in 2022.
There are, Mr. Walsh, as you know, concerns about data and privacy surrounding digitisation of health certificates. What would you say to allay the fears of people who are worried about sharing their health data?
Well, the beauty of this development, the IATA Travel Pass, is that you control your data and you choose if you wish to share it or not. So in a similar way, if you want to travel today, you have to show a piece of paper that explains whether you've tested negative in a PCR test or if you've been vaccinated. So this will allow you to do that digitally, but you control it. There's no central database. You're not providing the data to be stored on somebody else's servers. It's stored on your mobile phone, and you choose when you wish to share it with people and who you wish to share it with. So I hope that will allay the fears that some people have about their data being passed and stored by somebody else, because clearly that's not something that any airline would want.
And how is IATA's relationship with governments now? Because there have been quite a few hiccups, haven't there, particularly regarding travel restrictions?
Yes, I would be very critical of a lot of governments because, in fact, the crisis we face now as an airline industry is not really a crisis as a result of the pandemic. That bit was during the early phases. What we're facing now is a crisis because governments continue to apply restrictions on people being able to travel, particularly travel internationally. And our argument is very simple. The risk environment we're operating in today is completely different to what we faced 15 months ago. 15 months ago, we were dealing with an unknown. 15 months ago, there was a genuine fear that health systems would be overrun, that hospitals would not be able to cope with the number of people contracting the virus. That's not the case today. Virus transmission levels have largely reduced in many countries. And even where we are seeing a spike, it's not leading to increase in hospitalization or increase in intensive care. So the health crisis, I think, has largely been overcome. Yet the restrictions that governments put in place remain in place today, while the risk environment has significantly reduced. So we would be very strong in encouraging governments to reevaluate the measures that they have in place today. And I'm pleased to say we are seeing governments do that. Recently, a lot of governments have come out and said people who are fully vaccinated will be able to travel without restriction and without testing. And that's something I think that is genuinely welcomed by everybody. What we want is a sensible testing regime for people who aren't vaccinated, because we can't have a world where only those who are vaccinated are able to travel. There are many people who haven't had access to vaccines, many who are unable to take the vaccine. So we have to have systems in place that will enable those people to travel as well.
Let's talk one of the biggest revenue raisers for airlines, business travel. Following the video conferencing boom, how will airlines persuade people to travel business? And perhaps more importantly, persuade the company accountants people should travel business?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. And I think people often confuse business travel with travel in premium cabins because they're not the same. A lot of business people travel in the economy cabins of aircraft. And in fact, if I go back to my own airline group, where we did disclose a breakdown of revenues, so this was for the 12 months to the end of September 2019, so really representative of a normal year. What you see is about 13%, just over 13% of revenue comes from corporate travelers, which is significantly lower than people expect. And some of that is in the non-premium cabin. It's from memory, it's 8.7% is in premium and 4.5% in non-premium. What we see, a lot of people traveling in premium cabins are traveling on leisure. And in fact, that has tended to be pretty robust through various economic cycles. So I think the concerns that people have expressed about the impact of technology on airline revenues and profitability are grossly overstated. And to be honest, I would much prefer to be sitting in a studio with you having this discussion. I'm staring into this camera trying to look good. It's not anywhere close to being, thank you, but it's not the same as sitting down with one another. And that's what we find in all the surveys we're doing. Business people are saying that, the technology has been good to enable them to continue to do business, but it's not the same as being able to meet face to face. And I think you've also got to give credit to CFOs around the world who have always been restricting discretionary spend. So most of the travel that business people do is for face-to-face meetings. And I think that's likely to recover, not to the same extent as we saw in 2019, but it will largely recover as we go through this crisis.
We'll pause there for a moment, but still to come here on the agenda. In this one-on-one special with Willie Walsh, we'll be talking about going green. We'll ask what a carbon-neutral future might mean for the airline industry.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now. Welcome back to The Agenda. Still with me is the former CEO of Aer Lingus, British Airways, and the International Airlines Group, now Director General of the International Air Transport Association, IATA, Willie Walsh. Now, Mr. Walsh, let's talk about carbon footprints. you're expected to ask the airline industry to eliminate carbon emissions on a net basis by 2050. Will they be forced to adopt this target, or is that all wishful thinking, just a target and nothing more?
No, I think you've got to remember that the airline industry came together in 2009 and set goals for the industry, which effectively was a 50% reduction in net emissions by 2050. Now, that was consistent with the Kyoto Protocol updated by the Doha Agreement. But since then, in December 2015, we've had the Paris Agreement, which seeks, as you know, to restrict the increase in temperature to, as best as possible, close to 1.5 degrees rather than 2 degrees. So our commitment that we had made in 2009 is no longer aligned to what the world needs to do and what most governments are trying to do. So we will be bringing a proposal to our AGM in October of this year to update that. And I fully expect the industry to agree and to embrace that. There is a genuine desire, and actually one of the real positives that you should take from this crisis is that airlines have continued to invest and make significant financial commitments to improving their environmental performance. We've seen more and more airlines investing in sustainable aviation fuels. We've seen airlines investing in carbon capture technology. So a lot of investment has continued, despite the fact that airlines are facing a very deep financial crisis.
What do you think is the cleanest aviation fuel for the future?
Well, hydrogen is probably the best result we could get, but that assumes that you're producing hydrogen with green electricity, because a lot of energy is required to produce hydrogen. So
I know it's a sort of chicken and egg situation almost.
Yeah, it is. There's no point in us saying hydrogen is completely clean if the energy required isn't. So you have to have green hydrogen to be able to argue that you are eliminating CO2 emissions. Hydrogen is a possibility. Airbus has committed to a hydrogen-powered aircraft in 2035. I think that's ambitious, but it's great to see that they are doing that. In the interim, we're looking at the development of sustainable aviation fuels, and we think that that's a very credible path for the industry. We've identified that there is sufficient feedstock available through various different sources that will be genuinely sustainable, won't be competing with land use for fuel, for food or water, which is critical to be able to demonstrate that it is truly sustainable. So our industry will be significantly investing in sustainable aviation fuels with a view then to the potential for hydrogen in the longer term. I think electric and hybrid electric is an opportunity for commuter type aircraft. About 80% of the CO2 that the industry produces today comes from flights of greater than 1,500 kilometers. We don't see electric or hybrid electric being able to address that 80%. So that will be principally done through the development of the sustainable fuels and potentially hydrogen.
Despite all that, environmentalists remain deeply sceptical of airline chiefs' promises and efforts, pointing out that they rely on carbon offsetting schemes that they dismiss as greenwashing. Are they right to be sceptical?
No, I don't think they are. But they're right to highlight the fact that early on we will be dependent on offsetting as these technologies get developed. But if you look at it in financial terms, we estimate that for the period of CORSIA, which is the ICAO approved, and ICAO is a government body. Often people confuse it and think it's an industry body. So this is the government approved offsetting scheme for aviation, which will run out to 2035. We estimate that the industry will spend on average $17 billion a year during that period. Now, nobody's going to spend $17 billion a year greenwashing. That money will be spent on systems that will genuinely address the CO2 produced by airlines and offset some of that CO2. So I don't think people are right to be cynical. or question the industry's commitment, given the amount of money the industry will be spending.
Of course, to achieve carbon neutrality, you need the manufacturers, you need the fuel companies, governments, all to do their bit and to come together. Are they all being receptive to these green proposals? And is there any one of those stakeholders who should be leading the way, do you think?
It's a great question, and you're absolutely right to highlight that the industry cannot do this. Airlines can't do it on their own. We need everybody to play their part. It means governments, because we think there's a strong case for governments to support the development of sustainable fuels in the same way as they supported the development of sustainable fuels for road transport. We think that the aircraft manufacturers and engine manufacturers have to raise their game. It's not good enough that they are committing to net zero, expecting the airlines to pay the bill. We demand better performance from both the engine manufacturers and the airframe manufacturers. Air traffic control providers. This is a scandal. The situation in Europe is incredibly frustrating. It's estimated that airlines are emitting 10% more CO2 than they would need to, simply because we don't have an integrated ATC system in Europe that has been talked about for years and years. And the reason we don't have it is because there's political hesitancy, the lack of political will to addressing this. So, we can't have politicians lecturing us about the need to improve our performance, while at the same time they're refusing to address an extremely inefficient ATC system that could be changed overnight. And then you're quite right, fuel companies, they have to start investing more in the development and production of sustainable aviation fuels. They've made huge profits off the back of airlines over the years. They now need to turn away from kerosene and start developing a truly sustainable fuel. So everybody has to play their part, and quite honestly, everybody has to raise their game significantly if we're to achieve the targets that we've set.
And talking about the future, I note this week that United Airlines have said they're going to be buying 15 supersonic jets. I mean, this multi-billion-dollar investment in the future, isn't it? Is there a future for those sort of jets, do you believe?
Personally, I don't. I think it's a very small, tiny niche market. Having said that, I have great respect for Scott Kirby, the CEO of United. I think he's one of the best, the best in the industry at the moment. So he's clearly seen something that makes him believe that it can be a success for United. But if I look back at British Airways' Concorde operation, now Concorde was retired the year before I started at BA. But I know from first-hand information that wasn't a profitable business for BA. So I don't know whether there is a market for supersonic travel going forward. If there is, I think it will be extremely small and very, very niche.
You mentioned United's boss there, and I wondered whether you think national airlines reflect the personality of the person who leads the company. In other words, I wonder if BA reflected your personality, or vice versa, whether Al Baker reflects the personality of Qatar Airways. Do you create an airline in your own image, Mr. Walsh?
No, I don't think I did. But to be honest, I think there are airlines that do reflect the personality of their leaders. I think Ryanair very much reflects the personality of Michael O'Leary. And as you know, I'm a great admirer of what Michael has achieved. I don't agree with everything he says or he does, but I don't think he can take away from his achievement. Akbar al-Bakr has developed an incredible global airline. He took over that airline in 1997 when it had 2 aircraft. It is now one of the global airlines recognized in terms of its service. So I think there are airlines that do, but I think they're generally it's a small number of airlines that would reflect the personality of their leaders.
And also, airlines on the debit side, unfortunately, raised over $40 billion worth of debt markets in this year. Are the days of nationally sponsored airlines over? And are private airlines, do you think, the way forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've seen debt levels in the industry rise by about $220 billion since the start of this crisis, and now stands at over $650 billion, and it will increase as we go through this year and into next year. Traditionally, airlines were privatized because governments didn't have the money or didn't want to provide the money for airlines to expand, and it was felt that that was best done through the capital markets. I think that is the case still today. There will be many countries, though, that will feel that they need to own a national airline because the airline is very much integrated into the economy of the country. And you can see that in the case of Qatar. You can see it with Emirates in Dubai, Etihad. So there are airlines that will continue to be very important to states. But in the main, I think governments have exited airlines because when it comes to making investments, if you're a government and you've got to decide, do I invest in an airline to buy new airplanes or do I invest in hospitals? It's very difficult to say you should invest in, shiny new aircraft when there's a demand for money in the health system. So I think in the main, it will continue to be served. The world will be served by private airlines, but there will be state-owned airlines for many, many good reasons.
So lastly, Mr. Walsh, lots has changed during COVID, not least debts have been racked up to massive proportions. And the Green lobby has intervened so much in the change in the last 18 months, I would suggest. What is your vision now for the future of the aviation industry?
I'm very confident. I think the industry coming out of this crisis will be in a better position. I'm delighted to see that the industry remains totally committed to addressing the environmental performance going forward. There's no question in my mind that this industry is led by people who genuinely want to ensure that we have a viable industry financially, but more importantly, a viable industry environmentally. And that gives me great confidence in the future of the industry.
Willie Walsh, Director General of IATA, many thanks for joining us here on The Agenda.
Thank you.
It's difficult to overstate just how much the COVID-19 pandemic has devastated airlines. And the new man at IATA, Willie Walsh, definitely faces market headwinds. The pandemic is still unpredictable, and much of the aviation industry is mired in heavy debt. Profits have nosedived, and airline leaders don't expect traffic to return to 2019 levels before 2024. So, as Willie Walsh told me, getting planes back into the air is the first and the most important step to repairing battered balance sheets. We are, he said, in survival mode. But there was an upside to the hiatus because it also gave the airlines time to think of the future and how their fleets are powered. IATA is clearly aware that there is huge pressure to green the airline business and help tackle climate change. There is some relief to be found in various parts of the world now that vaccinations have started, but the road to recovery for air traffic will take some time. The shape of the post-COVID-19 sector in airlines is becoming clearer and holds lessons for airlines today. Multiple longer-running trends have been accelerated, such as the digitization and the phasing out of less efficient aircraft. But burdened by debt, many carriers have depleted their cash reserves. The forecast, though, is not without bright spots. Travel will definitely become greener and more efficient, and people are itching to get back into the air. Taking steps now will help airlines thrive in this hopefully transformed sector. Don't forget you can watch everything from past Agenda episodes and find additional exclusive content on our website, cgtn.com/Europe, or on our YouTube channel. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, @CGTN Europe. Coming up on a future agenda, let the Games begin. But just what kind of an Olympics can we expect in Tokyo in the midst of this global pandemic? But for now, from me, Stephen Cole, and all the Agenda team here in London, it's goodbye.